Welcome to the Energy Advisors podcast. Glad to have you with us. Glad you found us. We're excited to have you with us today. And when you get a chance, tell a friend, refer us to somebody. We have an exciting topic here today about distributed versus centralized energy systems, energy models. And before we get started on that today, we're going to have some guests later on this in the next coming week about this. We've got some exciting guests going online. But first, we always have to do the housekeeping. Don't forget to subscribe and like us on any of the platforms you're on. That way you don't miss any of our content. You found us one way or another today, whether it was a video platform, social media, or a podcast network. But don't forget, you can find us on all of them. If there's one out there, we're on it. So glad to have you in the conversation. All right, let's get started. So I want to talk about and open people's eyes to thinking a little differently about delivery models, okay, for energy. Now, many pundits have said this before, and I like the quote from Jordan Peterson. He said, before 1850, life sucked. It was hard. It was a horrible existence for human beings. Well, I'm not sure if I'm that pessimistic, but I do know that before 1850, and we started to get better technologies to come online, energy was very independent. And so it would fit into a distributed model. Every home, every hut, every building, every barn had to have its own energy source. Okay, think about it. Now, we started cooking with really remedial fuels like dung, wood, coal, and just about everything else we could figure out how to burn. And we also had wind and solar. So let's talk about that. So the first basically fossil-oriented carbon-based energies were the things we burned to heat and to cook. Okay. We might be bending metal with some heat, but things like that, basically, we were heating and not really cooling, heating with those fuels. All right. Now, we did have wind and solar. People don't think about that. You know, if we wanted to dry our clothes, we hung them out on a line in the wind and the sun. And if we wanted to heat things up, we set it in the sun. I mean, think about how you made your sweet tea, where you set your tea bags in a big gallon jar and let the sun do its magic. But if you needed to dry things out, you hung it out in the sun, you put it out in the wind, and that form of energy was harnessed. Now, the problem with wind and sun back then was the fact we didn't have technologies to really make it predictable or manageable. All right. So from the 1880s on, I'm going to skip up to from the 1850s on, I'm going to skip up to the 1880s. Now, in the 1880s, there was a lot of work going on with trying to figure out how we were going to electrify the country and who was going to win the war. Edison was the DC guy, direct current, so he thought things needed to be battery-oriented, direct power sources. And then Tesla was more on the side of the alternating current. Well, we know which one won out, alternating current. Our current grid systems are based on an AC model. And so when the economics of that started to make sense, AC started to make its distribution. So in large cities, New York, Chicago, San Francisco, power plants popped up. And soon after that, in large cities across the country, you had power plants pop up and starting to use and provide electricity to the consumers. Well, in the early years, the 1880s up to about the 1920s, there weren't a ton of appliances and things that could use electricity. The propagation and adoption of those technologies took a while. Most people don't understand that the U.S. grid really wasn't built out to the 1950s. Now, of course, it's been improved and updated and added capacity, but the grid really didn't come online in full purpose to distribute electricity till the 1950s. Now, if you look at an interesting story, I won't go on too big of a tangent, but did you know at 1900, so the turn of the century, there were more electrical vehicles than there were combustion engine vehicles? Yes, that's true. More electric vehicles at the turn of the century than there were combustion engine vehicles. And the characteristics were very similar. Very expensive, only affordable to the rich, and hard to recharge. Imagine that. So even like Molly Brown, the famous figure who survived the sinking of the Titanic, she had an electric car here in Denver, but she had one heck of a struggle trying to find places to get the electricity to recharge the battery. All right, so I set that aside for a moment because we're going to come back to that as we talk about distributed versus centralized. So what we had was a migration for electricity and then gas from independent locations to be a centralized, okay? And one big challenge happened from that: monopolies. It was too expensive for the average guy to build his own power plant, okay? And so you just didn't have the capacity to have your power plant at home. It just didn't work that way. So if you need electricity, you had to get it from a monopoly, right? That grew and grew. And as more appliances, more uses of electricity came along, more needs for that, the centralization would get greater and greater and greater. Now, in 1975, the first real commercial solar systems came along. And thank goodness some people had the foresight to pass what they call the Sunshine Law, which prohibited anybody from restricting the construction and use of solar panels. About that same time, we had this horrible concept in my mind come along. It's called the HOA, the Homeowners Association, and they didn't want wind towers and they didn't want solar panels, but thank goodness they passed laws that led us to have those. And recently, laws have been passed that any type of green energy generating devices cannot be restricted by homeowners associations. So we went from a strictly distributed model to mostly a centralized model. We got monopolies out of that. And now the technology has advanced. Okay, so let's fast forward to today, the 2020s. It's 2023. And the technology has improved immensely. 2 years ago, I put solar on my home after doing a lot of research. We picked a good vendor, looked at the technology, and we put the cells on the panels on our roof. And it worked out as a really good thing. And I'm a really big advocate of solar energy systems. Because our system was designed correctly, I have reversed the relationship I have with my local energy monopoly. Now, here in Colorado, we deal with Xcel Energy for the most part. And for the past 24 months, I've only had 1 month where I didn't generate more electricity and sell it back to them than consuming. So I only had one electrical bill, and it was a whopping $38 in the dead of summer during 100-degree heat. Okay. The rest of the time, my home created more electricity than I can consume. So with the two-way meters, I pumped it back onto the grid. I got checks and now credits from Xcel Energy, and I'm in the positive. I'm in the black. So I used to be a customer of Xcel Energy, and now primarily they're a customer of mine. And that's a great idea. Okay. So we're starting to head back to a more blended model, but a distributed model. And if you think about it, your home can be its own power plant. Now, not just solar, residential wind systems are up and coming. You're going to see more of those. And not these big bladed honky things. They have some pretty cool new technologies to capture the wind. But you have power generating systems that cut your dependence on these big monopolies. And so it's a great thing when you start to see this. You drive through your neighborhoods now, just about anywhere across the country, you're starting to see them pop up. You're starting to see independence being created because we're on our way back to a more distributed model. And people don't think about that. They just think about, well, I got some solar or I got a wind turbine and I'm just creating a little independence and I'm, telling people I don't have this power bill. But it really changes the model. Now, what do the power companies think of this? Well, actually, they're on board with it. What we've seen here in the United States with the advent of a wide-scale adoption, even though it's only about 4% of the vehicles, electric vehicles. Well, with electric vehicles comes demand for more electricity. In the last year, we saw articles out of California where the government was asking the residents to not charge their electric vehicles during certain hours of the day because the strain on the grid. Okay. We get that problem now during hot days and anywhere in the world where the electrical draw because electricity is so high for air conditioning that people and the systems are being asked to back it down. Okay. Well, that's a sad thing. I don't like to have any monopolies. I don't like to have anybody telling me what to do. And so if more and more people can add their little power plant back into the grid, then it helps the electric companies because they can't keep up. Now, I mentioned here we had 4% of the vehicles are now electric. What happens, and we can't keep up? What happens when it gets to be 14, 45, 50, 70% of the vehicles? What will the power demands be? So essentially, we're going to need all these mini power plants around the United States to be producing more and more electricity. Now, why can that happen today? Well, the technology has increased and is so efficient that solar panels can be on an average size house without huge south-facing roofs, just like mine, its own power plant. I create more energy than I consume. And that's exciting to me. And as we look forward, we're going to have a world where energy independence can be achieved by just the average ordinary guy. So it's a different way to look at energy, distributed versus centralized versus distributed. And in most cases, I think we're going to end up with a blended model. I know I'm not disconnecting my home from the grid here in Colorado yet, because I do need power when the sun's not shining the way my system's designed. But I create so much electricity that I don't have a bill, and that's a good thing. So when you're starting to look around, I talk to dozens and dozens of homeowners every day in my day-to-day business as an advisor to help people look at their choices. I tell them to think about that, think about independence and think about distributed models and how it's not only helping themselves, but it's actually helping the entire system because we don't have the money to replace and add to the infrastructure fast enough for the demand. The average American home has 53 electrical devices. And one of the challenges that we have is chargers. We have so many devices now that run on batteries. Let me give an example we don't think about. All my power tools in my garage. I used to have corded power tools, but now they're all battery driven. And in order for me to complete any type of project, I have to use multiple batteries to get there. Well, those little devices aren't that effective as creating that electricity for DC current, converting AC to DC. And so it's a higher use of electricity per watt. So you have to think about all the things that you have in your world that are cordless, your cell phones, your tablets, your PCs, your chargers for this and that, or your small appliances. So many things now are going in this way with cordless because we love the convenience, but people aren't stopping and thinking about the economics and the use of the energy. So I wanted to lay this out there today. We got some great guests coming up on this topic coming up soon. We always are looking for great experts, and so we're glad to bring them to you. And again, we appreciate you tuning in with us today because it's our job and our goal to be an advisor for you when you need information about energy and strategies and technology. So until next time, thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to tell a friend about what we're doing, like us, and click notifications on the platforms. And until next time, make it a great day.